Hello and welcome to an episode of Liquid Antiquarian, a shorter one with just myself. Dave's away traveling at the moment, so I'm just doing this one on my own, but he's been talking to me about this episode and finds it interesting. Even if it is a little different for a Liquid Antiquarian episode. Different in the sense that we're dealing with a much more recent time, 1968 to 1973. So quite precise. As ever on Liquid Antiquarian, we try and look at primary sources from the past and what they can teach us about how things were a little or a long time ago, and in this case, a little time ago. The primary source in question we're looking at is a company newsletter called The Grapevine. I purchased a full set of these, bound set, with every issue published. It's a magazine for a company called IDV, International Distillers and Vintners. This is a front cover and a back cover, and it told the goings on within the company. There's some rather dry stuff about group organization, etc. That's some AGM, I think. You will already notice the number of balding male heads in there. And it ran until December 1974, and there's an abrupt letter as an insert in it that says they had to cease publication of The Grapevine because of tough economic conditions. And I've just put a graph of inflation from 1860 to 2015 and showing that high point. So clearly there were serious issues in the UK economy. So IDV were a company that is said to turn in or become part of what we now know as Diageo. They owned large number of brands. It was an international company, something like 5,000 employees, I think. They had brands like Gilbey's Gin, Redbreast, although that was relatively minor, but I like it so much, I put that image in, and a retail business called Peter Dominic, as well as many, many other brands, Harvest Sherry, blended whiskey, J&B, for example, 4 distilleries, Knockando, Strathmel, Ochrask and Glen Spey, with one of those distilleries being built in that period of the publication of this newsletter. As I said, retail was within that. Peter Dominic, they had off licenses effectively that sold their own brands, but other people's brands as well. And I'll just put this image because I found that interesting. Wine straight from the wood sold within retail, superb draft wine. And here is Peter Dominic being advertised on the side of a bus, and they've got Reg Varney in from the TV series On the Buses, which ties into the theme of this episode, because On the Buses, if you haven't heard of it, is a notorious, but it was very popular British sitcom of the 1970s that is now criticised resoundingly for the misogynism and sexism of the show. So it's interesting that they should choose to roll Reg out for this publicity shot, which incidentally, those 2 women in the shot are not professional models. They work in the office, but they've been obviously asked to come down and be in that picture along with some of the senior people within the business there. So we're dealing with different time. I've mentioned a company that turns into Diageo. I don't necessarily think that the content that I'm about to show you is exceptional to this one company. They put a lot of effort into this newsletter. In fact, here's an image here. They send photographers around the country, maybe even internationally. They have a network of correspondence within their company, and their staff are expected to give stories to the correspondents, who then feed them up to the editorial team with an editor and a deputy editor. So they put considerable effort into it, and the newsletters are absolutely signed off by the man at the top. It was a man, of course. And So we are hearing from the company in their own voice, which I found extremely interesting when looking through these newsletters, which incidentally I bought for no other reason. I bought them blind, but I knew that they owned malt whisky distilleries and other brands, and I thought, well, I might get some interesting articles and some interesting photographs for use in Liquid Antiquarian. But flicking through it, it became really clear that wasn't the story. The story was just trying to put myself in the place of being a woman, or indeed a man, working at this business at this time, because it felt so different, but also so recently. These were the working conditions of my mother and my aunties, for example. But I'm not pointing the finger at IDV. I think that this is a reflection of the time. But as we go through, I have edited out the names of the people that are in there, with a few exceptions, but for most people, because we are dealing with a time now where these people might still be alive, and I don't know how they felt about being in these photographs at the time or afterwards. So I thought it was fairer to remove real names from the slides. As I say, things ain't what they used to be. It is indeed a different time, and that on the buses seaside postcard style of communication is very much there. I don't suppose I'm saying anything particularly new here, in that we could have easily done a fuller episode on sexist advertising in whiskey or other spirits, because they were quite common. There are some quite notorious teachers' adverts from that similar time. The late 60s and early 70s are known to be a pretty horrifically sexist time. This episode is a lot about how far we have come. I'm not saying we have come far enough, and I'm not saying that women's rights in the workplace is a mission accomplished type situation. But what I find interesting is how this was the words of the company themselves. This is how they wanted to project themselves to all the 5,000 employees around the world. And that made it somehow more pernicious, and somehow I connected more with the women of this time than if I had just seen a sexist advert or a sexualized advert. They're easy to find on the internet from the time, and actually you can say they're pretty easy to find now. That problem has not gone away, but this is the workplace, and that's why it hit a little different to me. So talking of ads, I mean, they actually proudly display some of the advertising that they're releasing. This is almost like a best practice little piece that they have that they're very, very proud of. This is Smirnoff. I thought the Kama Sutra was an Indian restaurant until I discovered Smirnoff, which is a brand, incidentally, that's just starting to do really well at this time. Here's another one. Let's look at the one on the right. First of all, I used to spend my Saturdays in the laundrette until I discovered Smirnoff. She seems to be donkey trekking, a sense of adventure that she has managed to discover since she started drinking Smirnoff. But the one on the left, I wonder if I dare discover Smirnoff, a woman who looks very young in her underwear, staring in the mirror. The effect is shattering. It's hard to look at, really, that advert. I can't think why they thought that was a good idea. And sticking with Smirnoff, use of women, and we're going to talk about the type of roles that women were expected or able to occupy within a business at this time. And one of them was a decorative promotional role, with quite clearly women chosen for their age and appearance. But interestingly, separately to this, they mentioned in the early 60s, Smirnoff's advertising majored on the now famous product characteristics of no after effects, mixing well, and no smell on the breath. So as I say, I'm removing the names of the people who are here because I don't know how the people themselves felt about them being photographed. And there are lots of photographs that are quite clearly staged. That doesn't necessarily mean that the woman wanted to be in that photograph. But here's one, someone just getting their lunch, tag on the side, "We like the look of the customers." This is a colleague who's just gone to get some lunch. But roles-wise, secretarial is obviously extremely common. Women work in an assembly finishing role within production. They also are found in accountancy, very commonly actually, and tea ladies. Tea ladies get an excellent mention within the Grapevine, and actually these are some photographs that I loved in telephone and telephone exchange type work, so within secretarial, which I am not denigrating the role of secretaries. Of course, that is a difficult and skilled job. There are 100 or so images of secretaries, and none of them are men. They are often presented in a way which shows legs and their beauty, and that beauty is focused upon. Of course, beauty is a relative term, but you can see the eye of the photographer, or the mind of the photographer, because you'll have to take my word for it, but this style of image is repeated many, many times. Short skirts were, of course, fashion of the time. Over on the men's side, salesmen are salesmen, with one exception that I found. And the exceptions jumped out just because I've shown one picture of a group of salesmen and then one image of a saleswoman. That doesn't make it equal. There are many, many pictures of salesmen. Interestingly, this was an Australian saleswoman who was visiting the UK. Carrying on with the exceptions, I left the name in here because I think this woman, Jill, should be praised for how she has managed to achieve within international distillers and vintners. But how she is described is also interesting. Her accomplishments are many. She was appointed to the fellowship of the Chartered Institute of Secretaries and to the company secretarieship of this property arm of the business, which is significant, owning £10 million of property. How is she described beyond this? She is attractive, she is kind, she's an excellent cook. I'm not sure how that is relevant. And she's also successful as a wife. But then the fact that she manages to hold her own in the tough negotiating arena of the property market. The boys are surprised, perhaps they are taken aback when a softly spoken girl who knows her way through the complications of leases, deeds, statutory regulations and the property market rates, as well as fast becoming an authority on the implications of VAT on property transactions. Exclamation mark. Hard-won success from Jill. And congratulations belatedly to you for managing to carve out a career in a difficult environment. But it is very much an exception, and it's an exception that is described with surprise, almost amusement, I read into that as well. Another exception here, Sarah Archer, who managed to get a laboratory role through studying. So she went away to France to study wine technology. So there's just a few examples of people who are managing to break through a system that is very male dominated and under male control and having success. Interestingly, this is the time when computers and data is starting to become a lot more of a factor within a business like this in the United Kingdom. And Mrs. Dora Bennett has become a computer operations manager straight away. This is an unusual job for a woman to hold. Mrs. Dennett has achieved this with plenty of experience. It's qualified of how she's managed to get there, but she's clearly, I would read into this, had to work very hard. Going back to data processing, Mrs. Ivy done it, who started in reception and the telephone exchange. She once also used to work for the computer department before the department even had a computer. And what a noble and graceful photograph of Mrs. Ivy Dunnett. But even then, they somehow managed to mention her marital status. And at one point, she went back to look after her home in West Drayton, but she's back and enjoying it. So even achievements seem to be qualified by referencing back to marital status, as if that makes it better somehow for the men reading it. That was my interpretation. I found it interesting. I maybe drew some lines there that computers were one of the few areas in this kind of nascent area of business that computers were useful and required a department in itself and significant investment. There was a mention of a figure that I forget that was a really high number for that period of time. It's interesting that women somehow managed to, or at least a couple of women, managed to carve their way into a role that had the word manager next to it. And I wondered if that was possibly two things. One, the association with women and accounting, and that is data. Accounting is data, but in those days, of course, it was done, pen and paper and ledger books. So maybe there was that association that was a role appropriate for a woman because they had shown to be good in that area. So therefore, well, no one really knows, and this is the second point, no one really knows where to put computers. It's an entirely new thing. So perhaps it was acceptable because there are roles that are quite clearly defined and ascribed to men or to women at this point, and computers maybe didn't fit, so they didn't quite know who should be doing those rules. The rules hadn't been established yet. Having said that, this is from the computer department, sent in to the newsletter and approved to be published in the company newsletter. So the lads in our computer division can program almost anything. And this is what they came up with, which is, I think it's drawn with just X's. Yes, well done, lads. It's the publication of it that surprises me. Often within the Grapevine, there is very much a sense of a woman can be used to decorate a photo. So, and they've actually used that word, decorated. A young woman from the transport department. They want to take a picture of their new lecture theatre. It would be a dull picture. There's no question about that. How do they make it less dull? They decorate it with a woman, which I can only assume that has been chosen because of her appearance. Another thing I noticed, and some of this made me think about the present time and things that I have heard women say, relations, colleagues, friends, and something that I'm very rarely asked to do is to smile if I'm thinking or having a bad day or whatever it might be. I think maybe once or twice in my life I've had the old cheer up, mate, it might never happen. I have had it reported by women in my life that they are asked to smile a lot by men, and it annoys them, which I understand. In the magazine, whether or not women are smiling, okay, they don't comment negatively if they're not smiling. That's not mentioned in the captions. But if they are, it's referred to. The editor and the photographer really likes to see women smile in the workplace. Smile, 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 smile. It struck me, it certainly made me feel something and think about the present. Furthermore, so the magazine has, it's 4 times a year, I think, done according to seasons. On the back page, they put a large photograph of staff members. The one on the right is not representative. In the 20-something issues, there are two men. The one on the left is more common, although, well, it, it gets worse. Here we are, 22-year-old woman, receptionist in the Edinburgh, seems to be taken outside for this photograph. So it's got that kind of beauty shot, model shot vibe. Another Grapevine girl. This time it's so-and-so, who is secretary to so-and-so. Here we have a mother. Mums get more attractive every day. And this woman is mentioned that she helps her husband run the branch of Peter Dominic in Westminster. I suppose mentioning with admiration that she manages to look after a family at the same time, but marital status is always mentioned. But again, this beauty shot feeling and absolutely choosing women for their attractiveness. It is striking if you look at every single photograph, which I have. Again, you know, with this soft light and the spring greenery make as pretty as a picture as you could ask for, as long as so-and-so is in it. Again, she's secretary to managing director of Croft Erez. And this one, a much prettier prospect on our back cover and much nearer home, graced by the names of two secretaries. But as I was going through this magazine and these photographs, because they're so recent, you do connect with some of the people within the pages. The tea ladies, I thought they were cool. I just want to say, the woman on the right, so cool, with her scorpion belt buckle. And of course, smoking in the office, not uncommon in those days. Again, here's another one, equally as easy on the eye, but for obviously different reasons. I have no idea what the editor means by that. But again, taking women outside to get a nice picture. And here, this young woman, and I forget her age, but it was mentioned elsewhere, very young. She's the reigning Miss Gilby. And she finds herself included in many social events, beauty competitions and beauty pageants. Again, a sign of the times. They were much more popular than they are now, Miss World, etc. But they actually have internal beauty competitions. And this series of magazines actually charts the progress of this, because this is the very first one, and there does seem to have been a dance. And then curiously, because of bad weather, the panel was under the chairmanship of a gentleman from Customs and Excise. This young woman, 20-year-old Miss so-and-so, from the Bottling Hall, came as winner. But then a little later on, in fact, towards the end of the series of magazines, this image actually shows the really kind of pernicious nature of it. So, of course, they are crowning a Miss Gilby. This might have been a great source of pride to the woman that won, but you are pitting colleagues against each other for, let's frankly admit it, their physical appearance. What that would do for workplace harmony, let alone the message it gives to the men who work in the business, well, my brain struggled with it. And this photograph I picked out, can't say I liked it, but I picked it out because you have the various jobs where people work. So there's a secretary, an accountant who actually won, a woman who worked on the switchboard, someone who worked in finance, in the wages, someone who worked in trade relations, someone who worked in engineering, and again, another person who worked in finance. Yeah, pitting colleagues against each other in a beauty competition. I just couldn't quite believe that. That was really, really shocking to me. But beyond that, they are also really interested in wider beauty competitions. and particularly proud when their staff enter and win these competitions. This woman, who is secretary to an export director, well, she had quite a fortnight. She became a celebrity and also won herself a husband, mentioning her hair colour, also mentioning she was the oldest finalist. They always seem to mention their ages. Yeah, after stepping at the last minute, she won this competition. And then again, taking us back to the time, the panel of celebrities who were looking for intelligence, personality, and an attractive appearance and a good knowledge of London, as if they had to become, I don't know, a cab driver or something. Bobby Moore, the England captain, racing driver Graham Hill, Drusilla Bayfus, the editor of Brides magazine, and Sir Desmond Plummer, leader of the Greater London Council, were the judges for this exhibition. So, they're very much a part of society, but I was surprised how much they embraced beauty competitions internally as part of company policy, culture. Is that the word? I'm not sure. So here's another entry with a director of the company taking such an interest in the competition. He seems to be forecasting, taking bets, I don't know, that this young woman would win Miss World and mentioning her dimensions. Not an employee of the company, but he's kind of praised in this magazine for predicting it correctly, being an excellent judge of beautiful women, and presenting her with a bottle of old Grandad bourbon whiskey. You couldn't make that one up. Another staff member here, again, young woman, who was employed by the company as a secretary to the director of the Mauritius arm of their Gilbey's company. So senior position. This employee has her dimensions mentioned, and the editor makes a little joke about how he wanted to have dinner with her when she flew over, but unfortunately she went back via Paris. Foiled again. And it all, I hope, is also starting to add up to you, to this picture of the value of women in the workplace at this time, according to their appearance. But the wording that comes alongside those images is just bizarre and, worrying to me. So this woman is an accountant or works in the accounting department. She may be secretarial in Canada. And they've got this picture, lots of legs, and saying it would make a very good advertisement for Black Velvet Rye Whiskey, one of their brands. But who wants to look at the packs? Again, that's one of the reasons that I blanked out people's names. She's happy. She's smiling in the photograph. But did she know what that photograph was for? Did she know it would come with copy like that? How did she feel about it afterwards? Pretty grim. These two young women they look like they're relaxing after work. They're having fun. It seems a pretty candid photograph. Again, all the legs. And it's talking about the staff looking around city cellars, that these two women, poured them some drinks just to show that not all the talent is in the kitchen, and there is this leisurely shot, as they say it themselves, but they are women who work on the telephones. And to me, this image gives the impression that they are fun girls. That could be in inverted commas there. What message does that give to other staff? And they encourage this magazine to be read by everyone within the company, to creepy guys looking for a relationship of whatever type, if they are going to visit that place of work. And did they know that photograph would be used in that way And some of it gets, well, pretty on the buses. So this is the guy who is charged with organising the social club. That's the image they chose to put in. He's alongside a go-go dancer. It's hard to say whether this is the result of the editors themselves at the time, and that's the tone that they're putting onto everything. But to get such a comprehensive view, signed off by the boss, distributed to all staff with a good period of time of publication, 6 years, is it? Nearly 6 years. Gives me some idea of what it was like to work for there and the challenges that there must have been for women, because some of it does get, I think I'm going to say creepy. So this is a piece that they did talking about the women, and they are all women, I think, who work on the telephones within the business. The introductory copy says, 3 cheers to the editor. He gets the most marvelous ideas these days. We'll do a feature on telephone girls, and you can have the job of ringing round and chatting them up. They describe their personality. Precise ones, chatty ones, jolly ones, slightly shy ones, very elegant sounding ones, calm and cool ones, warm ones, you name it, we heard it. But 3 things they all had in common: courtesy, helpfulness, and patience. What feelings of the women in question are hidden behind those words? What were the slightly shy ones thinking? What were the calm and cool ones thinking? What were all the other ones thinking about this guy whose job is to chat them up? But they are described in different ways. A slightly older lady. Again, they don't mention the ages when they are talking about women who are clearly a little bit older. The age is mentioned really consistently if it's a younger woman. Why? Are they letting people know that they're fair game? I don't see the reason that could be a positive one. But here they talk about, obviously, her marital status. They always do. Also that she is beginning to learn to drive, but she was pushed into it. And her husband believes that women should learn. 17 years old, hopes to marry next year, so hands off everyone. But when she's not making calls, dancing, swimming, camping, and model making, we never thought that hobby was a feminine pastime before, but she has been building boats and airplanes for some time. Again, these prescribed things that men and women should be doing. And finally, it's a great photograph of her. She looks fantastic, really glamorous. There's no doubt about it. And she's young again, 17. She gets around 100 calls a day and helps out. It's rather patronizing on the administration side. He then asked about dancing, and he starts to ask the editor, or the sub-editor, is there no romance anymore? Do couples always cavort at a distance of 2 yards? Well, I like the schmoochy ones as well, she conceded. She swims all year round and managed to get her bronze medal for it while at school. Anybody feel like a spot of life-saving? There's one other story which, unfortunately, it was hard to pick out and the photograph didn't really work, but there was one story about raising money for a charity with for children with disabilities. And there was an old pub that was supposed to be haunted somewhere in London. And to raise money, they locked 4 women inside the pub willingly. And they had to stay overnight in the haunted pub. And it recounts with amusement that a cat went across the floor and they thought it was a ghost. They're all dressed up in period dress, I think. And then they recount with amusement that 2 drunk men with a key, somehow they had a key to the pub, then attempted to come in and we don't know, do what. But the police were called. And this is just told as an amusing story that they're locking women overnight in a pub. men are breaking in, drunk men are breaking in, and that's a really funny tale that makes the pages of the Grapevine. Conclusions. I don't think there's anything earth-shattering I'm saying, really. It's simply that, yes, we know times were different. And at that time, there were certain changes in law that were beginning to look after women's rights in the workplace, but they had clearly not bedded in, and society was not behaving in that way. I mean, I mentioned on the buses, critically, that was a series that was absolutely panned at the time, but it was extremely popular with the British public. And pretty much every episode has much older men attempting to seduce really young women and making misogynist comments, sexist comments. There's almost every scene is like that. That was the time. And there had been an element of the sexual liberation. You know, the pill existed. Fashions allowed women to dress how they wanted. But clearly, the rights in the workplace were far from being established. And the treatment of women in terms of what the people who made the really important decisions, who were still men, but what they believed women could potentially do in the workplace is just a million miles from where we are now. And just this creepy, constantly mentioning their age, constantly mentioning their marital status, and how the wrong type of man who is potentially looking for partners in the workplace, or even if they aren't, these women are presented in a certain way that, with or without their consent, who knows, that if a man was to visit that office, that woman is already going to be treated in a different way than her workplace abilities merit, even if she is confined to a role that it must have been extremely hard to break out of. There are some bright spots. Bright spots to me where we do see women just managing to break out of those quite confined and prescribed roles and have success. But even then, they are patronized, and interpretation from me, the male reader is reassured by saying that they still have a successful home, they're still looking after the house, and but they are shy and they are quietly going about their work. But it's not unusual that she's a manager. But times are changing, possibly. Thankfully, they did change, continue to change. And well, we are where we are now. And I don't think it's really my place to lead this discussion on to workplace culture and workplace conditions for women and where we are now, because after all, this is a historical channel. And I ultimately just found this a really fascinating little snapshot in the words of the company itself, or just a company. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone who worked at IDV, but it is their own words, and it gave me that insight to what it may have felt like for a woman, and indeed a man. I'm sure not everyone thought this was the right way to be describing your company. I found it really interesting. I hope you did too. Thanks for watching.